Hey everyone, Brandon Harvey here. And before we get started today, I wanted to tell you once again about a survey we're conducting here for Sounds Good. It's a simple survey that will help us learn more about you, no matter how long you've been a listener of Sounds Good or how frequently you listen to the show. If you would, take a few minutes to go to gradient.is/podcast survey and let us know what you think. There are some questions about your listening habits, what other podcasts you subscribe to, and what you like or don't like about the show. Again, that's gradient.is/podcast survey. And along with the survey, if you do like what we're doing with Sounds Good, would you mind going to iTunes and leaving a short review? It really is the best way to let other people know about the show. We really appreciate the support. Thank you so much, everyone. Now, let's jump into the show. Hello, Brandon Harvey here with this week's episode of Sounds Good, the podcast where every single Monday I sit down with an inspiring person to talk about happiness, overcoming struggles, and living a life of intentionality and wonder. You might have noticed that last week we took a week off, but I'm so excited that we're back today with an amazing conversation with hip-hop artist, poet, Propaganda. Propaganda grew out of the Los Angeles hip-hop scene and has become a prominent voice in the world of political activism and education. He's assembled a body of work that challenges his listeners with every verse and reaches across the spectrum of pop culture. I've admired this guy for a long time, and I am so psyched to have him on the show. And even more exciting, we're playing one of my favorite pieces of work from Propaganda to close out the show, so definitely stay tuned through the end. And with all that said, let's jump into the conversation. Here we go. All right, I'm on the line with Propaganda. Prop, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you. Glad to be here.
Man, this is super fun. You were just telling me about the context of where you're at, but I want the listeners to hear that. Tell me what's going on in your world, in your context right now.
Yeah. Oh man, the most epic dad life ever moment. So I'm at my daughter's ballet and jazz practice. And I'm sitting in the car with my 1-year-old who's just picking up a piece of her crust from her toast from this morning that she didn't want to finish. So I'm just sitting. There she is.
That's perfect.
So I'm just sitting in the car. Yep.
Glamorous. This is amazing.
Super glamorous. My wife was like, I got a meeting. I can't keep the baby. So I'm like, oh, okay, but I have a podcast. Got to figure it out. It's like, okay.
That's the best. Way to defy gender roles. This is perfect.
Oh, man. If you knew how our house worked, bro, like,
I love it.
Gender roles are a joke.
I love it.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and so you're in LA right now.
I am.
So you were LA born and raised.
Born and raised in Pacific Ocean salt water in my veins. I can't breathe fresh air. I can only breathe smog. Yeah.
And what was life like for you growing up? What was, I don't know anything about what Los Angeles life is like growing up because I grew up in a small little town in the Pacific Northwest, so still West Coast vibes. But tell me about your life growing up.
Yeah. Well, I started off in sort of inner city Los Angeles, South Central LA. And then we moved to about 20 minutes east of that to an area called the San Gabriel Valley, specifically a city called West Covina, La Fuente. And the LA narrative, like if somebody's not mentioning like the Mexican influence, then like they wasn't really here, So so I grew up in a almost totally like Mexican neighborhood. So very like incredibly bicultural, very bilingual. And in a lot of ways, like it's funny because like I look at all the positive things that LA had to offer especially during the DARE program, War on Drugs years, where like, it was obviously there was all kind of like social, political, cultural turmoil and the gang life and all that was happening. But at the same time, it's like, man, a burgeoning like skateboarding scene was happening. You know what I'm saying? So like the Bones Brigade dudes were like down in like, in South Santa Monica, you know what I'm saying? And then you had like the Venice Beach scene with like the Radiotron and the breakdancers, and just like there was so much like sort of culture being made during that time that even in the midst of whatever like poverty and kind of struggle, you know what I'm saying? Like I feel like, man, I wouldn't trade my childhood for the world, you know what I'm saying? So yeah, I grew up very bicultural, in a lot of like sort of arts and just a lot of like culture now was being, kind of developed there.
Yeah. And you were a part of that, and you were a part of the like early hip hop scene, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, early hip hop scene, is like early 80s, you know what I'm saying? And like I wasn't necessarily I wasn't really there for that.
Maybe I'll swap some words around and say your early life was spent in the hip hop scene.
Yeah.
There we go.
So I'm like, I'd say like second wave like hip hop. But I did see like the big boys. Like I remember for my 10th birthday. No. For my sister's, what birthday was that? I think it was like her sweet 16. Like she had a sleepover and we rented Breakin', the movie Breakin', and they rented Breakin' in Beach Street. And I remember sitting in the living room watching. While she had all her friends her friends were in the living room and I was in the kitchen. We lived in the hood, so you could see the TV from like the kitchen. So like I remember just watching like just these like dudes spin on their head and just being like, man, whatever that is, like I need to be a part of that, And remembering like just you drive through where our some of our major highways like the 10 freeway and the 101 freeway, where they cross is an area called the LA River. And there is, it's not like a river like Pacific Northwest River. It's like, it's paved, it's concrete. So like, and I remember seeing, all the like graffiti there and just the murals and just being like, man, these things are just so larger than life that like, I have to be a part of whatever this is. It just like completely resonated.
And what age did you start to get to be a part of that?
So yeah, pretty young. My father used to take me to Venice all the time because he would go buy incense and like sort of other things. So I saw it all the time. I started rapping, I'd say my freshman year, but before that, like my sister was like totally in like the house scene. So she was like,
gotcha,
house dancer, looking like the Kid and Play movies, like all in her friends and stuff like that. So like, I was around it very, very young, but I think like I was like, okay, yeah, I'm going to spots, I'm buying music, I'm like, stealing spray cans was probably around like my freshman year of high school.
And looking back, would you say that you were good at being like, were you a good rapper at the time? Were you doing something that you were kind of proud of, or what was that like?
I mean, yeah, of course, like looking back now, I'm just like, oh my gosh, it's so embarrassing. But like, for the time and, for the season around me, I was being affirmed,
That's cool.
People were like, man, that dude's dope, like keep going. And so like, and back then, like you didn't get like, you can't just like record yourself rapping and upload it to YouTube. It was like the stuff had to be live. And if you were live, you had to battle somebody. So like, this was like lunch table, you know what I'm saying? A big crowd of people, and we're just like freestyling against each other. And like, so it's like that immediate like, pressure to like perform, and like the instant gratification that like, if you kill it, like, you're instantly like, everyone knows, and like, you're the man for the day, you know what I mean? For, fourth, fifth, and sixth period, that's all everybody could talk about was how like, oh man, like Prop killed that guy, you know what I'm saying? So like, so that was like, the first few years was that, you know what I'm saying? But then like, I mean, you're in LA, so like 2 schools over is like somebody that has like a legitimate record deal, who's like actually touring the world doing hip hop. So you're like, I mean, I'm good for the scene, I guess, but there are amazing rappers literally next door to me. You know what I'm saying?
Totally. But I'm smiling really big imagining you like at lunch in high school battle rapping. Like, this is amazing.
Yeah, dude. Oh man, we was going in. You imagine like obviously, like, I mean, it's the early 90s, so it's like we're wearing like size 40 jeans. You know what I'm saying? Like, just huge, huge jeans and double XL t-shirts. And I was like maybe a $135, like, you know, so I was so thin and still am, but I was just so like, I had no business being in something like that. And it's funny because like my parents thought like, man, that obviously that look, you know, everybody's look, when you look back at like your ninth grade year, you're like, oh man, I looked ridiculous. So my parents like were like trying to like be in front of that and just being like, man, I'm just not gonna let you do this because you're gonna regret it when you look at pictures later. But I'm still like every other kid. Like as soon as I left for school, I had borrowed one of my friend's clothes from my backpack, pulled it out, changed, went to school. You know, had to change back before I went home so that my parents wouldn't get mad at what I was wearing. You know, but
that's so funny.
Now I'm like, man, you guys are totally right.
And so you graduate high school and you went on. What did you do next after high school? Was it more hip hop or?
Yeah, I mean, I never stopped rapping, but like, you know, it's kind of like everybody that, you know, when you're a kid, everybody has a skateboard, but nobody expects to go pro.
Totally.
You know what I'm saying? Like that dude's like really good. So you just continue in life. You don't stop skating, but you go to school, you know, and it was the same with hip hop for me. It was like, I never stopped rapping, but I mean, you don't imagine yourself as like, that's going to be an actual career. So like, yeah, I went to college. For illustration and intercultural studies. And I was, I was going to be like, I was going to be an illustrator, you know? And then the year that I graduated, my senior year of college, was when Disney and Pixar merged. So they ended up firing a good like 40% of their illustrators. And so then because of that, it was like, man, I'm in a job market competing against like people with like Mulan and like the Lion King.
Yeah,
in their
not to mention
portfolio.
Competing against computers, you know?
And computers,
it's
you
just
know?
A different
and
game.
Stupid me being the purist that I am was on some like, man, you know, I can draw. I don't need Photoshop. Like stupid. So stupid. You know what I mean? So like, I just didn't pay attention in those. I mean, I could work anything Adobe now, you know what I'm saying? But like at the time, I was like, I don't want to be a part of that because I'm like, these are my strengths. Like my strengths is drawing and painting. I'm going to play to my strengths. And that was dumb because, you know, and now I'm doing a podcast about poetry and hip hop. You know, so like, guess how good that went.
The transition's amazing.
Yeah.
And so, but at that point you went down the road to education, correct?
Yeah. Throughout my my time in college, my like day jobs were all in like the school system. So whether it was like tutoring, instructional aid, daycare, all those things, like I just kind of noticed I sort of had a knack for it because like at the end of the day, to me, like teaching was like storytelling. You know what I'm saying? And storytelling was hip hop. You know, so to me it was like I feel like I can just do this, you know, and again, like, you know, I was just being affirmed by like some of the people around me. And then, you know, somebody introduced me to like this magical thing called substitute teaching where like you just like, you mean I just go for a day and like you just pay me for and I don't have to grade nothing. I get to just like, I could pick my own schedule and just, you just want me to be in front of these kids for a few hours? Sounds great. You know what I'm saying? So, so I started subbing like in sort of the juvenile court system. So like we have a system here in California, like if you get in trouble with the law, like, you know, and you're a minor, you still got to go to school. So they have like, you know, court or like what they're called camps. So they're like juvenile camps where you're not exactly in prison, but you ain't exactly free either. So those places, have schools. And I was like, man, I'm just going to start teaching there. You know, one, because it was like, I feel like I resonate with those kids more, you know what I mean? And then secondly, it was like, dude, nobody wants to do it. So I was like, man, I could get in here and like kill it, you know? And then I did and fell in love.
That's incredible.
It was like, dang, I actually really like this. So then I was like, man, I'm just going to go get a credential. So I went to get a credential in education and social science. And that's my daughter.
And so you went and you got a credential.
Yeah. And then, so I kept teaching in like alternative, like sort of high school spaces. Just because of what I knew about the structure of education. I'm like, I feel like this is much better for students and I wanted to be a part of that. And then ended up helping start a charter high school that was kind of like built around the arts and like big like edu speech, so like integrated instruction, project-based learning, co-teaching, like constructivism, just all these like big soaring like education terms. But like I got to come in like the second year of it. The first year they only had ninth graders, so I got to come in when they were starting to like build out all the rest of the grade levels. And I helped build out the 11th grade and helped design some of the ninth grade stuff.
Man, that is awesome.
Yeah.
And then obviously you're not still working for a charter school anymore.
I am not.
You're
yeah.
a hip hop artist, a poet, traveling on tour. Like, what was the transition? What was the pivot? What was the deciding moment?
So what's crazy is like the day I got the year I got hired at the school was the year I got my first record deal.
Whoa.
And it was one of those things where it's like, okay, this isn't like, I wasn't Britney Spears, like, they're not cutting me $1 million check to like make a record and go on tour. It was like, okay, we'll put out your record. Okay, now go make a record. I'm like, oh, okay. You know what I'm saying? So it was more like that. So, I'm not an idiot. You know what I mean? I still had rent, so I kept working. But it's kind of funny. It was almost like Weekend Warriors. It was like, I'd get out of work, head straight to like my buddies' like offices in Whittier, and we'd catch a flight to Florida, and go do a show on Saturday night.
Man,
with the and it's so funny. You got a line at the merch table, people trying to take pictures. I'm like, little do you know, when I get back to work on Monday, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's gonna be like, this is the real life I live, and and then after a while, it started being like, man, one day, like, the phone sort of rang. Maybe 6 years later, the phone rang, and then it never stopped ringing. And, I was grinding during that whole time. I got to do a lot of cool projects. I toured with KRS-One. I did some, I got to do, like, the Warped Tour, and not all the dates, but a number of, like, the California dates. I was on, I did Rock the Bells, like, just all these, like, cool things while still working full time. And then eventually it was, like, one of those things where I was like, man, I'm not doing either of these things well. Because your attention's so divided. So like, if I'm gonna be a teacher, just be a teacher. If you're gonna do music, then do music. And now it's kind of like, if you're gonna do it well, you know what I mean, then you have to at some point stop dividing your time. Plus the California was making so many like policy changes that just kind of like, I just kind of felt like I was being pushed out just as much as I was being pulled away.
Well, and so you made this transition and you jumped into, poetry and hip hop. And the thing is, you kind of got to make a little bit of a compromise, because your work has always been very, very teaching focused in a lot of ways. It's really been focused around education. I mean, sometimes the topic is education, but you're taking ideas that are big and lofty, and you're saying, how can I break this down in a 3-minute track?
Yeah.
Tell me about the intentionality behind that, because that's not what every hip hop artist does. That's not what every musician or artist does.
Yeah. So I always say, like, a good example, I think, probably for your audience would appreciate is, like, I say, like, you can go the Radiohead route or the Sigur Rós route. And they're both amazing, right? But you're not gonna hear Sigur Rós on like your morning drive or your afternoon drive on the radio. You know what I'm saying? You're gonna hear that. But at the same time, how many bands can point back to Sigur Rós like, yeah, they're why I do what I do. That's the sound I look for. That's what I want to be. You know what I'm saying? So for me, it was like, I just took the Sigur Rós route. Or another one is like, you could say like, take the Michael Jackson route or the Prince route. Like Michael Jackson was like, hey, and they both survived. They're both amazing. Michael Jackson was like, look, what's the sound right now? All right, I'm going to be better than everybody at this sound. And I'm going to keep evolving. I'm going to find the best writers, the best musicians, get them in the room and make amazing, timeless music, right? Prince was like, I'm riding naked on unicorns. That's what I'm going to do. You know what I'm saying? Like, y'all do whatever y'all want. I'm about to find, like, bootyless pants, and I'm going to wear that mug. You know what I'm saying? Grow a perm and do these weird things, and it's going to be amazing.
And so what I'm hearing from you right now is that you're saying that you want to ride naked on unicorns.
Oh, man, you telling me? Yes. So like, I was like, I'm going to go that route. Cause that, to me, that's the stuff that like I found more inspiring. So like, once you swallow the pill that like you may or may not ever win a Grammy, you may or may not ever be on a radio, but I'm going to love this music, and dudes that are on the radio are going to wish they made music as creative as me and as poignant as me and as timeless of me. I'm going to take that route. You know what I'm saying? So for me, it was like, there was that. And then there was like just sort of probably three parts. Like the second part was like, the reality is like, I just don't have a pop ear. Like, I don't know how to make music that's like, you know, just catchy and like, you know, kind of, I don't want to say shallow, but like just kind of fun for the moment, like moment music. Like I don't know how to make moment music, you know? And then, I mean, I come from like, my father was a Black Panther, man. I just come from like a line of people that like, yo, everything you do is about something bigger than you, you know? So teaching it was about something bigger than me. The hip hop I fell in love with was always about something bigger than the music. You know what I'm saying? It was about the culture. You do it for the culture. You know what I'm saying? So if I was going to start making music, it was always going to be about something bigger than me.
That's huge. And I feel like you've done an especially great job at that. And when you're creating something that's bigger than you, what you're really doing is you're offering perspectives that challenge the cultural norm. You're saying, here's what people believe.
Yes.
Here's why I'm going to break that down and challenge people to change their opinion or act differently or whatever that is. And in a culture of cynicism, how do you remain hopeful and continue to challenge people to join in with that hope without getting sucked into that cynicism as well?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's not like I don't get sucked in. It's like I don't have moments of like incredible cynicism. But I think that like the reality of that, like the reality of like, man, you're gonna ebb and flow. Like you're gonna have ups and downs. You know what I'm saying? I think that once I gave myself sort of that like permission, if you will, to be like, man, I'm gonna have days where I'm like, this freaking sucks. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I hate having kids. You know, I want to pour another shot of Makers. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, this is, I don't care. Who cares? It's my fifth. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, once I kind of gave myself permission to have those moments and just be like, okay, go through them. Like, know that it's just a moment. Let me go through it. But if you get to a place to where you're like, look, I know that this is a moment, you know what I'm saying? Then, you know, you can allow yourself to just like go through the process. You know what I'm saying? So for me, it's like knowing that it's a process actually keeps me from staying cynical because it is just a process, right? And then secondly, it's like, man, I think a lot of cynicism comes from like isolation or creating like an echo chamber in your mind, in your heart, and in your like social media feed. You know what I'm saying? Like, so if you don't have like, if you just have people that are just, you're following people that don't like necessarily challenge your norms, or, you know, I'm not saying like, you know, follow back trolls that are just like dissing you all the time. I'm not saying that, but I am saying like, there's a time, like, allow yourself to have sort of other perspectives kind of in your feed. You know what I'm saying? That'll remind you that maybe the world isn't just exactly the way that you're imagining it. You know what I'm saying? And then that'll like keep your joy. So like, for example, for me, like I, you know, since I deal with a lot of issues of, you know, race and prejudice and politics and stuff like that. So I deal with a lot of that, you know, it's real easy for me to just be like, man, I'm just done with white people. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's easy to get to that. But I have enough, you know, white friends and family members that like, well, I consider family, I don't know, like white blood family, but like family members that I'm like, man, I love you guys, and y'all show me a broader narrative of who this dominant culture says or believes they are. You know what I'm saying? So like, really, like somebody like yourself, like I'll follow you in my social media just to be like, man, for every sort of like closed-minded, you know, hypocrite, I'm like, there's a you know, and I just keep those people around me just to remind me that like, man, the world isn't, you know, as like, you know, terrible as like I would imagine, you know?
Totally. And I'm trying to do stuff on the opposite end of the spectrum. You know, It's probably about 2 years ago, and I really started to notice that whole echo chamber idea. And it's especially true on Facebook. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but Facebook only shows you 75 to 175 people in your newsfeed. And so I've got 2,000 friends on Facebook, and I'm only seeing the people that Facebook wants me to see. And so I kind of started to realize, well, Facebook wants me to show up on Facebook, have a good time, enjoy Facebook, and then come back again and again and again. So they're not going to show me ideas that I disagree with, because then I have a non-positive experience on Facebook.
Yeah. Yes.
And so on places like Twitter or Instagram or even on Facebook, I'm trying to find more and more and more people who have opinions that are totally different than my own. And so I started following a huge, it's so crazy. For the longest time on Twitter, I was just following this group of white creative people, not on purpose. I'm not I'm only going to follow white creative people, but it's just you follow somebody and then you follow somebody else that they hang out with. And I was like, there's just this one bubble, but there's also all these other bubbles, and people joke around all the time about Black Twitter and about how there's this other
which
Twitter.
Exists.
And so I was like, I'm just going to go start following Black Twitter. And I feel like, honestly, a huge percent of the people that I follow now don't look like me, don't talk like me, didn't have the same upbringing as me, don't believe in the same things as me, but it challenges me. And that's been one of the best things for me.
And Black Twitter is fun as hell, right?
Oh, it's so much better than whatever my little corner of Twitter is.
White Twitter is? Nah, Black Twitter is one of the funnest experience. And it's funny because it's I kind of get that just because of the nature of music that I do. There's this part of the down home, my native tongue, which would be Black Twitter. But then there's this other experience of why I already knew who you were. You know what I'm saying? Was I'm a part of this other sort of white creatives. You know what I'm saying? But that for me, it kind of goes back to, again, I grew up very bicultural. So the idea of being around people that quite literally don't speak the same language, that's not hard for me. That's not a strange thing, So I kind of have a sort of a propensity to that, but
I love it.
Yeah. But if you keep those things, in your life, you know what I'm saying? For me, that's one of the biggest, fights against cynicism,
Yeah. And to repeat what you said at the beginning, you said cynicism comes from isolation. It comes from creating an echo chamber. And I think that's the biggest thing you can do is you can not fall into that isolation. So outside of the world of hip hop, we've talked a little bit about your family. Obviously, your daughter is hanging out in the car with you. Your other daughter is dancing just a little bit away. You mentioned your wife. And I've heard you say before online, and I'm pretty sure in some of your art, you've said that your family is a family of freedom fighters. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So my dad was a civil rights vet. He was in the Vietnam War, came back, got a lot of disillusionment from man, I'm about to go across the world to fight for this country against people that ain't never called me nigger. You know what I'm saying? That you know what I'm saying? They've never done these things to me, but I gotta go. And I'm like, my homeland won't even let me vote, and you want me to go die for these people? You know what I'm saying? So it kind of does something to your brain, after a while. So he kind of came back, really got involved in sort of civil rights, eventually joined the Los Angeles chapter or the Watch chapter of the Black Panther Party.
And for people who don't know, for people like me who are in the world of white Twitter and maybe don't even know that much about the Black Panthers, can you give a tiny bit of an explanation, or even just a lot of people think this, but this is true?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the people's image, I think a lot of times y'all image of Black Panthers is it's almost like the equal and opposite of the Klan, this sort of black version of the Ku Klux Klan, which couldn't be any further from the truth. Number one, Panthers weren't seeking out white people to beat up. You know what I'm saying? They wasn't, nor were they burning they wasn't burning black fists and Egyptian ankhs in front of people's lawns. That wasn't happening. You know what I'm saying? No, it started off as there was so much police brutality happening in Oakland that eventually they were like, man, okay, what can we do to stop y'all from just like whooping our ass every time we walk outside? You know, so they started basically following the police and just making sure, like, when they were doing their patrols or something like that, that they were, even if you had to cite somebody, that they were treating them fairly. So it wasn't ever like anti-police or anti-government. It was more like, just do your job. You know what I'm saying? Like, it
Totally.
just be what you say you are, you know, and then that's really like what the attitude was. And then eventually, you know, they started moving into a lot more like social programs. So they used to, you know, if a kid can't focus in school, oftentimes it's because like he's hungry. So they started doing like sort of lunch programs and then after school programs for tutoring and like job training and stuff like that. And then eventually it became like a political party to where it was like, man, these are the demands that we have, like, you know, the immediate ending of police brutality, like, you know, fair and livable housing and like food for everyone, you know what I'm saying? Like equal representation, just the same stuff that like at the end of the day that the framers of the Constitution was asking for.
Totally.
You know what I'm saying? Like if at the end of the day, it's like, man, just like, dog, treat me like I matter. You know what I'm saying? So eventually it was like, well, since you're not going to listen to us like peacefully asking, we're going to start using the very laws that you say we have, which is you say I got the right to bear arms. Okay, cool. Well, I'm standing right here in front of this, you know what I'm saying, in front of this place with my rifle that I lawfully have, you know, and I'm going to make sure that you do your job correctly. You know what I'm saying? And if you're not going to live, we're going to march. So they stood in front of the, you know, the state capitol stairs and was like, look, man, these are our demands. You know what I'm saying? Like, y'all got to stop doing this. And that was really like the sort of the crux and attitude of the Black Panther Party was that, you know, and of course there was like, you know, variations within the thing. No group is like truly homogenous. And there were some that were more extreme than others, some that were more violent than others, some that thought that like, you know, working it this way is not going to work as well as if you work it that way, you know, and then all those things. Then eventually you had like, which is like recorded, it's public record now, like, you know, a organized sort of clandestine plan from the CIA to break them up because truth is they were incredibly effective. Like it was working. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like crime was going down in the city. People were becoming organized. People were getting their rights to vote. People were learning their rights to vote. And, you know, the reality is like if it's a saying among like people of color that like, you know, if you've only experienced privilege, equality feels like oppression.
Yes.
So that's what started happening. Like there started being equality, and you know, those that have just enjoyed a level of sort of privilege for so many decades, you know, started feeling like, man, this privilege is being like challenged. You know, so. We're just saying, no, it's equality. That's what you know what I'm saying? What are you talking about? Right. But eventually it was like, nah, this needs to stop, you know, and we need to stop this, you know. So then that's when like the sort of the propaganda machine, you know, was put out as far as like, nah, these are violent, they're racist, they're, you know, all these other like sort of pieces. And there might have been, like I said, members in the group that were violent and racist, you know what I'm saying, or violent and prejudiced, but yeah, it was more like a spin. So anyway,
that's good. That's a good explanation. Continue.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. So my dad was part of the after school sort of tutoring program. That was the part that he was involved in Watts.
That's cool.
Yeah. So you know, you have that like kind of in the backdrop for me. Like I ain't had like cartoons on my cartoon posters on my wall or anything like that. Like I didn't have that. Like I had 5 African kingdoms, you know what I mean, in their lineage, like on my wall. Like I read my sister in junior high read Angela Davis's like autobiography, like stuff like that. You know what I'm saying? Like I had to write a book report on Nat Turner, you know, it's about to be a movie about it. I had to write a book report for my father, not for school, for my dad. I had to write a book report about it. You know what I'm saying? So it's these type of like sort of things that are like kind of flowing through sort of my childhood, like I just understood that, like, man, there's a like I said, there's a cause that like you just have to participate in, and there's just no option because of like you owe your people, you owe the world around you to make the world a better place. So like that was just sort of my experience. And I was drawn to, as I got married, I was drawn to, a young lady that feels the same, you know what I'm saying? And my wife is heavily involved in like sort of advocacy work, whether it's in education, but she works a lot of times with like sort of first generation and low income students. So it's like she sees like a lot of like the connections between Black and brown children. Now she teaches a class at Chapman University on the structure and formation of privilege and how privilege works. Like she's just sure her PhD is in educational policy and equity and social context and like systemic issues in education. Like, yeah, so she's a freedom fighter in her own right. Matter of fact, probably at a much more effective level than I am. You know what I'm saying? Because she has the actual degree to prove it.
That's incredible. And then, like, tell me about your daughters and how old are your daughters again?
So I got an 11-year-old and a 1-year-old.
11-year-old and a 1-year-old. How are you in the same way that your dad raised you up to be a freedom fighter? What are you doing in the lives of your kids to kind of do the same thing?
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? Like, so because of like where my wife went to college, or at least for her PhD, it was very affluent. It was a very affluent area, but during that time, that was like my daughter's like kindergarten, first and second grade year, so that sort of like imprint of like what life really is, like it kind of stuck with her. So for her, like first 3 years of school, all she knew was like this world that just did not match, where we were actually going to live because we were just there for school. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And the type of like work we were going to actually do. So a lot of our time was actually spent kind of like undoing that. So what we did as soon as we could was like moved her out of this affluence and back into the city just so she could like have a more accurate perspective of like sort of what life really is.
A lot of people, I think that they would say, oh, I want to give my kid this life of affluence. I want to give them this experience that's nicer so that they can get ahead. And you're saying the best way to get ahead is to erase that, to get rid of that and give an accurate experience.
Yeah, once she started being like, she hung out with her grandma and she was like, Daddy, grandma actually rides the bus.
Oh.
And she was like grossed out. We were like, all right, that's it. Nope. You know what I'm saying? So we were like, yeah, well, okay, we need to move. So we moved to like, we're in Long Beach and granted, like, we're not in the projects because we don't have to be, you know what I'm saying? But at the same time, like we're in the city, where like, like real life is happening. So there was things that we just made sure she was a part of and that she participated in, you know what I'm saying? Just so she could be in a lot of ways, like bicultural or in her own right, and we keep her like sort of abreast to like what's happening nationally. We make her watch like presidential debates, you know what I'm saying? We make her like keep up with like protests and riots. Like we've taken her to like Black Lives Matter protests and stuff like that. So there's things that we just make sure she's continually aware of, you know what I mean? And, just keep those things in front of her and kind of let her make her own decisions, you know what I'm saying? But like one of the things we had to like accept about, having kids was like, she's just not us, you know what I'm saying? Like she wants to, go to ballet, you know what I mean?
Totally.
And like, we're like, yeah, and just kind of like, I don't want to stifle that, but at the same time, like when we go to ballet, I want you to think about like, this is a privilege. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like you have a level of privilege because of what, not only just what mommy and daddy did, but what granddaddy and grandmama did, you know what I'm saying? And like, just reminding her that like, this didn't happen out of a vacuum. You know what I'm saying? Like
totally.
Somebody fought for your rights to do this. You know what I'm saying? So like, that's something that like, we constantly sort of remind her of.
Yeah. And I mean, it took me way too long to understand my privilege. It wasn't until the last few years. And so, And it's been incredibly helpful for me. It hasn't been a burden learning my privilege. It's actually been incredible. And so it's amazing that your daughter is going to grow up with that experience of saying, I get to do this thing, but that's out of a place of privilege. And I think it makes you more altruistic. It makes you more aware, loving.
Absolutely, because privilege isn't inherently wrong, because we all have it. What in some way, shape, or form, we all got privilege. Privilege, it only gets wrong when A, you deny it, or B, it's not leveraged for good. You know what I'm saying? Like leverage your privilege for good. You know what I mean? And for the service of others. When you do that, you know what I'm saying? Like that's I mean, privilege is a privilege, and it's great. You know, just leverage it and leverage it correctly.
Do you experience any sort of backlash for using your privilege for good or using your art to talk about important topics?
Yeah. Some of the backlash is, you know, the same, like, sort of like trolls everybody gets, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Where like, I listened to a podcast about like the sociology of like, of social media trolls, or the psychology of social media trolls. And it really helped, like, when, like, in a lot of ways, it's like, well, they're sociopaths. So like, once you know that, you know what I mean? Like, then you're like, oh, okay, I get it. You know what I mean? They may not go out and kill somebody and, like, you know, eat their underwear, but in the same way, they get this, like, sort of like demented joy from, like, prodding, you know what I'm saying? And like, once I knew that, it was like, I can handle this. But I think some of the backlash is, I guess, it's sort of unspoken, if you will, where it's like, we're just going to stop booking that guy.
Yeah.
Or, you know what I'm saying? Or like, we're just not going to invite him to this, you know what I'm saying? So what I found was like, there can be somewhat of a gravy train in sort of the little subgenre of like music that I exist in. But you got to play by the rules, you know what I'm saying? And if you don't play by the rules, then that river kind of dries up.
Gotcha.
And so I found that, like, in a lot of ways that raging river became a brook, you know. But what was funny to me was like, my message never changed from when I was first introduced to this world, you know what I'm saying? So I'm like, I don't understand why, like, I don't understand what changed. Like, I've always talked the way I talk, you know. But
people are just starting to get uncomfortable now.
They start getting a little too uncomfortable, you know what I'm saying? So there's that. And then I think, on the other hand, though, like, it's introduced me to this, like, whole other, like, world of, like I said, people like yourself that are like, man, just the opposite of, like, what I would expect dominant culture to be, you know what I'm saying? That kind of like my boldness has kind of invited me to, where it's like, nah, it's people that are like, no, help me understand. Like, show me my weak spot, show me what I'm missing, you know what I'm saying? Like, and I want to be a part of, like, you know, the change in this world, you know what I'm saying? So, like, I've been more, like, introduced to that world, which is dope, yeah.
I think that's been really cool in the last year, just seeing a lot of people in my circle it seems they're reaching out to you and they're saying, hey, help me understand this, help me explain this. And you've been a really, really good, and it's probably your amazing upbringing of biculturalism that's allowed you to say, hey, let me translate this for you. Let me explain this in a way that you understand. And man, one of my favorite pieces of yours, it's that video that you just went live with of your live performance of your poem 20 Years.
20 years,
man, it's incredible. And it just,
Thank you.
You listen to it and you feel uncomfortable and it takes you by surprise. And at the end, your heart is bumping, and it's just, it's a great, incredible experience. And it's one of my favorite things you've
Thanks,
ever
man.
created. And I think you're creating it at the perfect time, and you're creating it in a way where people are willing to listen and they're willing to be challenged and changed. And that's huge. Man, okay, and this is something you've talked about before online, kind of along these same lines. You've shared a little bit about how your daughter will call you crying when you go out of town because she's scared that you're going to end up dead, like way too many black men, a disproportionate number of black men, really. And of course, as a woke, black, world-changing son of a Black Panther, you're fully aware of like how troubling these injustices are. But I would imagine that your daughter bringing it up affects you in a different way. Can you share about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's probably one of the biggest like pickles I find myself ever in. The closest comparison is when like, when you're in kindergarten and like, the policeman comes to like, career day, and like, hey, let's show you the squad car, look at the sirens, and it's like, I want to think it's like cool and fun like all the other kids, you know what I'm saying? But like it's just not your experience. That's just you come from an area where I'm from, and it's like, man, they were the third gang. You have Crips, you have Bloods, and you have police. They were the third gang, So there's this like turmoil, that you have in like trying to sort of participate in this like experience with law enforcement, and like you want to see them as heroes. You know what I mean? And you want like, nobody's anti-police. We're anti the abuse of power. Like if my house getting broken into, I want to call the police, and I want to know that the police are gonna come and stop this dude from breaking into my house. What I don't want the dudes to do is kill the guy. You know? What I don't want the dude to do is mistake me for the criminal and choke me out in front of my own house, which has happened. So nobody's against policing. We're against unfair, unjust policing and police being above the law. That's what everybody's against. So having said that, my little brother is a CHP officer. My father, after, as he became an adult, older, my father was involved in like the LA County Probation Department. I got law enforcement in my family. So knowing that, coupled with the reality that like my daughter's fear is not unjustified, it just makes for a pickle, So like, how do you explain to an 11-year-old the difference between the systemic and the individual? Where it's like, I can't say that every cop's not racist, you know what I'm saying? But at the same time, there's a structure that they're a part of that feeds a racist structure. You know what I'm saying? So like,
and it's hard enough to explain on Facebook to adults, explaining that nuance to your daughter, like that can't come easily.
Nah. So then you just have to like click into just comfort and just like, but at the same time, I don't want to give her a delusion. You know what I'm saying? So like, it has to be like, all right, well, you and mom y'all remember to pray for me when I'm gone. You know what I'm saying? And just like, and just it's more about like reminding her just how much I love her and like why I leave and what I'm leaving for, and you know what I'm saying, and that like, God loves her more than any of us could imagine, you know what I'm saying? And like, just try to like put her mind at ease more about like comfort. But I can't legitimately say, I'll be fine, baby, don't worry about me. You know what I'm saying? Like, but I can be like, keep me in prayer, put your mind on better things, you know what I'm saying? And like, I'll check in with you, you know what I'm saying? But don't, just like, don't live in fear, you know what I'm saying? Like, go about your life, you know what I'm saying? And know that like, hey, I'll be back, I'll be back.
That's good. That's really good.
Yeah.
And dude, I really appreciate you talking about race, because I know it's like a heavy topic, and it's not your job as somebody of color to have this conversation. So I appreciate you being willing to talk about that. And, the goal of this podcast is for like this to be a place where we can have conversations that matter and conversations that are important. And I love your perspective.
Thanks, man. Especially when you're talking about like not being cynical.
Yeah.
Like, if you could talk about race in an uncynical way, it's helpful.
Exactly.
And that's what I'm trying to do for you. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, you're great at that.
Thanks, man.
And with that, I want to transition into this part where every single episode, I love to ask 3 questions to guests. And the first one is this: how would you describe the kind of person that you most admire in the world?
I like it. Person I most admire in the world is humble and quiet, yet when they speak, like the earth stops. That is very patient, like waits for the shot. You know what I'm saying? But when the shot comes, has no fear in taking it, but is just humble, gracious, patient, quiet. But when they speak, it's thunderous.
That's good. That's a good kind of person.
Yeah, I know, right? I wish I was that.
Me too.
I'm more like all over the place. Like, wait, no, listen. You know what I'm saying? Like,
that's me too. Yeah. Well, we'll keep on working on it.
Yeah.
Question number 2. What are you consuming that you love right now?
Well, one would be salt and pepper chips, kettle chips. I'm consuming a lot of that I'm loving. I have a salt tooth. I don't have a sweet tooth.
I've got a sweet tooth.
Yeah. And then other, like, I'm actually consuming a lot of, like, sort of books on, like, gender and gender roles. Sort of like women's issues. I mean, I have 2 daughters, you know.
Yeah.
I'm reading a lot of books about that, you know, and sort of misogyny and patriarchy and how those things kind of play out. Things I may have, like, unknowingly sort of perpetuated and carry, you know what I'm saying? In the same way that, like, you know, a white dude figuring out about racism, you know what I'm saying? You're like, oh, crap. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's for me, it's like I'm figuring that out about, like, misogyny, where I'm like, oh, crap. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So that's kind of like a lot of stuff I'm consuming now.
That's good.
And then massive amounts of NPR.
Dude, all about the NPR. NPR Politics Podcast has been my favorite politics podcast. They just have like a pretty healthy conversation on politics without diving into cynicism. It's just kind of fun.
Yeah.
And then
and wait, don't tell me.
Wait, don't tell
Probably
me.
Like it's like my favorite podcast.
Yeah, I love just like flipping it on the end of the week. I don't know why I said flipping it on. I tap it. It's a button on my phone. But
yeah, me too.
It's great.
Yeah.
My last and final question is, based on the ways you've chosen to step out and live your life differently, what's one thing you'd encourage someone else to do in their own life?
Man, start looking for like people doing and affecting culture the way you want to, and just like absorb everything about that person.
That's really good.
Yeah, like who's doing what you're trying to do.
I think somebody gave me that advice when I was in maybe high school. And so I started looking around and I'm like, okay, who's creating the art I want to create, and who's doing something amazing with the platform that they've gained from that? In a lot of ways, that's what this podcast is about. And I have no doubt that, you know, you're asking that question and somebody's going to say, well, I'm picking Prop. Like, this is amazing. I picked this guy.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Prop, for people who want to find you online, where can they stalk you? Where can they listen to your music? Where can they jump into the conversation? Yeah,
well, I'm on all the social medias, and it's just Prop Hip Hop. So that's Twitter, Instagram, all that. It's Prop Hip Hop. Our website is humblebeast.com. That's humblebeast.com. All of our music's there. If you're into downloading, it's there for free. If you're trying to stream, it's just Propaganda. I'm on all the streaming sources, Spotify, Twitter, or, Apple and Tidal. Like, I'm on all of it. So, yeah, the YouTube, same thing, Prop Hip Hop. Dude, so good. Seriously, thank you so much for hopping on the call and for hanging out while your daughter's in ballet. I really appreciate it. Yeah, dude. We'll have to do it again next time your daughter's in ballet. That'd be so fun. And this little one's asleep finally, so like we're good. Man, thanks so much, and thank you, brother. And keep being awesome. Yeah, man, back at you. Sounds Good with Brandon Harvey is part of the Gradient Podcast Network and is created in collaboration between me, Brandon Harvey, and Gradient. Check them out at gradient.is. That's gradient.is. Thank you so much to each of you who tuned into the podcast this week. If this is your first time listening, subscribe to the show to get a new inspiring story downloaded straight to your phone in your sleep every single Monday. You can connect with me online and get updates about the show on Instagram, Twitter, and Snapchat at Brandon Harvey. That's Brandon with an E-N. And this week and every week, you can find the show notes for this week's episode of Sounds Good at brandonharvey.com/podcast. It's brandonharvey.com/podcast. And I mentioned this in the intro, but this week
We're ending the show with the live performance of Propaganda's poem, 40 Years. And it is so good. I'm excited for you to check it out. And with that, that's a wrap for this week's podcast. Enjoy the poem, and I'll see you online, and I'll talk to you next week when we get the opportunity to learn from another inspiring person. Sound good?
All right. Well, 20 years. 20 years, but, who's counting, right? 20 years, she endured a said marriage where sister really ain't have no say in the original arrangements nor the terms thereof, but 20 years, he beat her senseless. Somehow or another, she managed to muster up the quote-unquote bravery to stick around because one day he decided maybe he shouldn't hit her no more. Now, granted, that was due to outside pressure that threatened the security of his pockets, but he stopped, right? But the damage was done. And on their 40th wedding anniversary, they both decide, maybe we'll throw a nice little shindig, spare no details, all expenses, pull out all the stops, invite all their family and friends. She is to smile, celebrate her husband's greatness, talk about how far they've gone as a country, as a couple. They're to reminisce on the good old days when everybody knew their places. They're to talk about all the great the great triumphs that they've accomplished. All the lands and the places that they've conquered, that they stole, that they visited. And before any of their friends come, in the still silence, you could hear the creak of the floor as he walks, touches ever so gently, caresses the small of her back and says, babe, look how far we've come. Those last 20 years, they were rough, but these have been good. Let's not talk about the last ones because, they make everybody uncomfortable and they separate. And why would you want to separate? Let's unify. Let's talk about unity. What is she to do? Well, she's to hold her little sparkler, wear her pretty little red, white, and blue dress and act like the first 20 years didn't happen. As if she's still not suffering under the thumb of the mental walls that he didn't build. Oh yeah, he ain't hit her no more, but he don't have to. The scars do all that work for her. She ain't been the same since. Her hip, it's a little bit out of a place. Her jaw, it's kind of ajar to the left, so her smile a little crooked. And every once in a while, he compares her to other wives like, she ain't as pretty as y'all are. But he turned and tell her, I don't see color. I don't see beauty. She is to be thankful that now she could be in the big house. She is to celebrate her rights. Her right to vote, on what's for dinner, right? Things are good now, or at least they better than they were. You should pat your nation, your husband on his back, tell him he's the greatest nation, the greatest country, the greatest man in the world. What is she to do? You ask, if it was so bad, why didn't she leave? As a matter of fact, why is she always playing the victim? Why is everything about her? Don't other wives get hit too? Don't all wives matter? Why am I forced to only mourn your scars? Girls hit girls all the time. We call that wife on wife crime. Why I need to worry about just yours? And if it was so bad, if it really was so bad, why was he not prosecuted? Why did not all of your friends who saw this all going on step in and say something? Maybe she's making this up. Why did your church not even step in, instead silenced you and said, this is not our issues? And in a weird twist of magic, somehow she just became the victim and the villain. And I don't know how this worked. Does he not owe her? Does forgiveness not require restitution first? Does the cross that you say you cling to does not scream that justice comes before reconciliation? How can we talk about unity if you're not ready to admit you wrong? Is she not worth justice? And what about the ladies that fight back? Can you not understand why she might think to take matters into her own hands and punch this sucker every once in a while? Even though we know that vengeance is just a bastard version of justice, can you not understand the pain for which this young lady is suffering? Is it not too late to say you sorry, huh, Justice? Those thoughts don't plague your mind? I don't know. You know what? Never mind. Happy 4th of July. Enjoy your ribs.